Good morning and welcome to Politics Nation. President Donald Trump's order this week to strike Syria may represent a break with his non-intervention foreign policy. Here's Trump on Tuesday.
I'm not, and I don't want to be, the president of the world. I'm the president of the United States. And from now on, it's going to be America first.
And here is the president 2 days later on Thursday.
Tonight I call on all civilized nations to join us in seeking to end the slaughter and bloodshed in Syria, and also to end terrorism of all kinds and all types.
So, okay, we figured there must be some politics behind the Syria strike. Let's ask Congressman Brendan Boyle, a Democrat from Pennsylvania. He sits on the Foreign Affairs Committee. And MSNBC analyst Malcolm Nance, who is a 20-year veteran of the U.S. intelligence community. Let me go to the Congressman second, but let me ask you, Malcolm. We've heard all kinds of things since the attack, theories that this is all some kind of understood back and forth with Russia to cover things. This is something necessary, and that the president was genuinely moved when he saw the pictures of the victims of the chemical weapons attack by Assad. I mean, from your intelligence background, what does this attack, the airstrike by the President Trump, what does it really mean from a military standpoint?
Well, it was very clearly a demonstration of firepower. And that's what the president intended to project, which is a demonstration that the United States has the ability to strike at any place in time. Unfortunately for President Trump, he doesn't realize we've been demonstrating that every day since 9/11. Right. I mean, we've done over 7,000 airstrikes. Unfortunately, in order to get his message across, he also pulled his punch. He struck an airfield, he blew up a few revetments and some aircraft, but he left the runway completely intact. And
it's running again, the same.
It was running within the same hour.
So then what's the point?
Well, even worse, he did not strike any of the chemical weapons on the facility.
So he struck none of the chemical weapons?
No.
Didn't have that airport in any way down, but maybe an hour?
Right.
So, Congressman, what is the politics here? Is this some politics here? Are we playing optics? I mean, how do you read this? You're on Foreign Affairs Committee. What does this really mean, if anything, other than the theater of we're going to play tough?
Well, first, it's great to be with you, and I have to say, trying to interpret or figure out the Trump administration and Donald Trump's motives is a constant guessing game where no one really seems to know for sure, including people who serve in his administration. Just at the beginning of this week, we had the Trump administration saying that it was no longer U.S. policy to remove Assad. Those were the words from the Secretary of State of the United States.
Right.
And then by Thursday night, we were launching 59 missiles into Syria, although as our fellow guest just pointed out, it appears that militarily that strike achieved next to nothing, and now the airport's back and running. So the politics of it, I think that clearly Trump just wanted to send a message, but the only thing worse than not responding is responding in such a weak way as it appears that we've now done. Also, one thing that I do want to point out is the tremendous hypocrisy from a number of Republicans in Congress who 4 years ago vociferously opposed any intervention, any action by President Obama. Some of those same folks, such as Mitch McConnell, are the loudest voices today praising what Trump did and calling President Obama weak. So the hypocrisy is astounding.
Well, not only was Senator McConnell opposed to it, Donald Trump was opposed to President Obama doing exactly what Donald Trump did as president. But let me ask you this, Malcolm, touching on what the congressman said. I saw a front page story in the New York Times this morning that the Trump doctrine may be no doctrine. I mean, when the congressman said it runs contrary to what even a lot of people in his administration were expecting or saying, it is appearing that his doctrine is no doctrine. Like, we just don't know what he's going to do.
Well, we don't know what he's going to do because he has no strategy, and that's part of the doctrine, right? What is his core value with regards to the application of force and diplomacy? But when you get that core value, you actually have to lay it out. You have to map this stuff out. It doesn't appear that he's doing that. He seems to have been running on emotion. And second to what the congressman said, last week we had the Secretary of State Tillerson saying no involvement in Syria,
right,
then an airstrike. Now we have Nikki Haley saying this morning regime change is on the table. One of these things can't stand. They're going to have to...
One or the other.
One or the other, but it will cost, you know, right now we did a sanitized strike. Didn't cost any American airmen or sailors their lives, but from this point on out, it could.
Congressman, when you think of the fact that this week, Tuesday, Secretary of State Tillerson is going to be in Moscow, and he's going to be there engaging with the Russians. A lot of people are saying, well, this may have been something like a wink-wink between the Russians and President Trump to make them look like they are not in collusion together. What will you be looking for in terms of Tillerson's trip to indicate to you whether or not there's a real bond here, or whether in fact there's been some division on the policy in Syria and others? Because if, as Malcolm just said, if you have Tillerson saying no engagement, now Haley even bringing up regime change, what about this trip is going to give clarity in many areas, some of which I raised and this question that Malcolm's raised? What are you, as a member of the Foreign Affairs Committee, going to be looking for to get clarity?
Well, I'm not sure that we'll get much clarity, frankly, from Rex Tillerson's trip over there, just because, kind of what Malcolm was saying before, Donald Trump really has no ideological rooting. I mean, I've said before, not just on foreign policy, but on domestic policy as well, Trump is really not a conservative, he's not a liberal, he's not a Republican, he's not a Democrat. He's a Trumpist. And his ideology, if he has one, is to do whatever is in the best interest of Donald Trump at all times,
yep,
and consistency be damned. So it's not beyond Donald Trump for Rex Tillerson to go to Russia this week. Perhaps he will, and I hope he will, say the right things, especially as it comes to not just Syria, but when it comes to standing by our NATO allies, such as Ukraine and our other European allies. At the same time, Rex Tillerson could then come back to the U.S. and Donald Trump say something that completely contradicts exactly what the Secretary of State said. That is the kind of world that we're living in now in the Trump administration that is really unlike any other previous administration, either Republican or Democrat.
Well, you mean Secretary Tillerson will be lucky if Mr. Trump waits for him to come back before he says something opposite.
That's good.
But
That's a
Malcolm,
good point.
you brought up Ambassador Nikki Haley. Let's look at what she said on Friday.
It could be that Russia is knowingly allowing chemical weapons to remain in Syria. It could be that Russia has been incompetent in its efforts to remove the chemical weapons. Or it could be that the Assad regime is playing the Russians for fools. The world is waiting for Russia to reconsider its misplaced alliance with Bashar Assad. The United States will no longer wait for Assad to use chemical weapons without any consequences. Those days are over.
So we hear some pretty strong language from Ambassador Haley about what Assad is doing. No news to the world, but strong language, and a direct hit at Russia. Right. Something that many of us are saying, are they playing a script here with Russia, or is this real, and we'll see where it goes?
Well, it's quite a challenge to answer that question because, you know, Nikki Haley is playing a very strong role as UN ambassador to the United Nations, U.S. ambassador to the United Nations. Very strong role. Her script is very good. And what's very interesting about it is it's a very old script. It's the same script we've been saying about Russia for almost 70 years. However, Secretary of State Tillerson, who is supposed to be the point man for diplomacy, doesn't even appear to be on the stage. And then we get all these other mixed signals from within the White House that perhaps this is going to be, Russia will come in and intervene, and that they will eventually reward Russia with the lifting of the sanctions if Russia does something about this chemical weapons issue. And it does appear to be a form of kabuki, because one side is showing one thing, and then all the back channels are showing another thing. And the airstrike showed something very definite. We have power, but we won't really hurt you.
Yeah. Congressman, as you go forward serving in Foreign Affairs, in the Foreign Affairs Committee and serving your constituents, and we look at what is going on in Syria, and all of us outraged, all of us horrified by what we see, the issue becomes, if Assad, who's already back attacking in the very same area, using the same airfield, what is the next step? Do we get more and more involved, or do we just leave it where it is and basically a next to nothing attack because we're afraid we'll get involved like Libya and there's no way out, or like Iraq where you're in a whole quagmire? I mean, what do we do, or what don't we do as one sitting there in the Congress that ultimately you're going to have to weigh in on this?
Yeah, well, as you mentioned, I serve on the Foreign Affairs Committee as well as the Middle East Subcommittee. And so having had a number of hearings into this issue, I can tell you that the statistics are horrific. Over the last 4 or 5 years, as part of the Syrian civil war, we've had over 500,000 people killed, many of them innocent civilians. We've had over 12 million Syrians displaced, become refugees. 12 million, that's slightly more than half of the population of the country. And it's had an enormously destabilizing effect on the politics of most European countries. Indeed, I would question and argue that you probably don't have a President Trump if you didn't have the terrorist attacks that we saw in Paris and in Belgium, and the whole rise of the refugee issue. So clearly we've had no policy towards Syria. That has been kind of, and by the way, no one has been the bigger culprit in that than Congress over the last 4 or 5 years. When President Obama wanted Congress to rise to the occasion, completely ducked the issue because of the difficulties. The time for ducking is over. And I really think specifically on one potential solution, even though all the options are ranging from bad to worse, I really think we should now explore finally the safe zone option. This was something that Secretary Gates and Secretary Hillary Clinton argued for within the Obama administration about 4 years ago. They were rejected. President Obama decided not to go in that direction. But as we move forward, recognizing that there's going to be no end in sight to the Syrian civil war.
And I think that's the problem.
We want to continue.
I'm going to have to cut you off because I'm out of time. I think that's the problem. There's no end in sight, and there's no real doctrine. And when you look at the fact that, as you say, the refugee crisis there in the Middle East and in Syria, but then you match it up with the president now saying he was horrified by what he sees, but no Syrians come here because my immigration policy doesn't match my humanitarian feelings. It doesn't look like there's going to be a resolve to this that makes a lot of sense, at least in terms of consistency. Thank you, Congressman Boyle and Malcolm Nance.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.